Hey everyone, Matt from Stronger You Personal Training here. And this week we're going over oblique strength and how to use your obliques to brace better and create better 360 expansion and better abdominal pressure. So I want to divide today's content into two different sections, right? So the first part is going to be about how to use your obliques better, and the second portion is going to be about physically strengthening your obliques. So you're just going to favor them more. Your body's always going to use the path of least resistance. So if you're really strong in a particular pattern or with certain muscles, it'll favor it because it takes less effort to use them. So obliques, we've talked about them before in some of our other bracing videos, but as a quick kind of recap on them, obliques run on the side of your body, and the obliques, specifically we're talking about your internal external obliques, so they're going to connect your ribs to your hips. So lifters we see that aren't necessarily using their obliques are maybe like your category 2 lifters that we were talking about in our bracing video. Lifters who tend to kind of breathe in and pull in a little bit more. They struggle with that lateral expansion of the trunk. So how do we address this in the first place? So we want to start from the ground and work our way up, and we're basically looking for the threshold point where that lifter no longer uses their obliques. And that's where we want to put our focus. We build up from there. So our basic progression that we're working on here is we're going to start the lifter just on their back in effectively like a dead bug position. And you can do this to yourself. You don't need a second person to help you out with this at all. But you're just using your hands to check right across the side of your waist, just above your hip bones, between your ribs and your floating ribs and your hips. And you're looking to make sure that in this position, when you brace, you can feel that your abs are tight, so that if you poke them, they're firm, and that they're pushing outwards so that you can't squish yourself, right? That's our criteria. You would feel the same thing on your front of your abs, your rectus, and on your side. It should all feel pretty uniform and cylindrical, right? From there, we start to test left to right imbalances a little bit more. So assuming you can do that dead bug position well, we're going to put you into an oblique sit. So you're propped up on your elbow, one leg in front, one leg down, and you're going to focus on, from here, staying nice and tall, and actively brace. And see if you can breathe in and breathe out and feel that same stiffness through the side, or if it feels mushy. And make sure you can feel that as you breathe, you're getting good expansion as well, right? You want to make sure that you're basically feeling all the same things through these positions, right? So I can check obliques, check obliques. So if I have trouble, let's say on my right side compared to my left, and I feel like I go a little softer, or I can't create as much expansion on my right side, I'd probably want to put a little bit more focus there. Really common to have lifters who have an easier time with one side or another, right? From there, the next step is we're going to build up into adding some load into that frontal plane control, right? So we have you in a side plank position now. We take you from this oblique sit, and we bring you up here. Again, making sure you can feel stiffness, and as you breathe in, there's expansion as well. From there, we're just simply getting the lifter up into standing, which is sort of our last piece we want to check before integrating it into the movements that we're trying to build. So squat, deadlift, bench press for powerlifting, right? We want to make sure that in standing, the lifter can brace, create stiffness through the trunk, and breathe with it. So as they breathe in, it expands, but everything stays tight. And as they breathe out, everything is still relatively expanded and it stays tight. Of course, as you breathe in, everything's going to be a bit bigger. And as you breathe out, everything's a little smaller, but there's always some expansion. You want to make sure, and as we've outlined in our bracing video, that your breathing cycle can be separate from your brace when you need it to be. It's really important for proper bracing function. So let's say we've covered this. Our lifter now understands how to use their obliques well. They can go through up to a low oblique sit and getting even expansion and tension on both sides. What do we do now? Well, pretty simple. We try to apply it to the movements that we're trying to improve upon, and we try to develop the obliques in patterns that are going to be similar to what we're trying to build, right? So if we're using the squat as an example, we're going to make sure that in a squat pattern, that lifter can maintain oblique tension. So we use that same starting point of a standing brace, right? And we're creating tension, make sure everything feels stiff and expanded. And they're going to go down and make sure there's no change and come up. And as you can see, there's no real change in my spinal position or spine angle there. If there was, that lifter, if they're monitoring their waist and the tension around their core, it's probably going to feel some changes where something might push out more on one side and pull in on another, or something goes soft. So for example, a lifter that gets pushed back onto their heels a lot and struggles with their toes lifting and their back rounding out will probably feel something like this, where right around that midpoint in the squat, their front portion of their abdomen is going to pull in. Their obliques may or may not still push out, but there will be like a divot through the front of the abdomen. And it's no longer a cylinder, it's shaped like a crushed pop can. And so there, and you can see right as this pulls in, I'm losing my position and I'm rocking back onto my heels. So there's no or less spinal stability there, right? And then of course they might catch it again on the way up, but we're looking for pretty uniform stability from the top to the bottom. So that lifter specifically, if they're struggling with that in their barbell squats, let's say, we want to build up from a good body weight movement. And we'd have them go down to the point where they make that error. So let's say right there, right? And we'd get them to pause, make sure they can hold this position, and correct, right? So using that scratching drill we've outlined in previous bracing videos, and make sure they can create tension. So poke the kidneys, create that scratching effect, and try to actively flex the obliques in the front of the abs to create expansion. Make sure they can breathe there and hold that position. Own the positions you're trying to train. From there, once we've corrected that, now the lifter can actually stabilize to this point instead of stabilizing to here and then folding, right? And then we just incrementally build up the range of motion, making sure they can control it. So if they fold here, we can correct it. Great, we're going to go down a little further until they make a mistake again. Right there, let's say. Same thing. Correct, create that brace, and go through, right? In concept, pretty basic. From there, once we have clean unloaded movement, give them a barbell, go lift weights, and use weights that you can use to control technique while you're still building that up. For some, that's going to be just focusing on in the warm-ups. Some people need to spend a little bit more time, maybe reducing their training loads for a couple of weeks because they're negatively impacting their form acquisition and their progress in the long term. A 2-week hit is nothing in the grand scheme of a powerlifting career. Take the small step back, you take big steps forward later on. So, second piece we want to try to cover is the strength aspect of your obliques. So, as we mentioned earlier, your body's going to take the path of least resistance. So, if I'm really strong in a certain pattern, and let's say I've spent years powerlifting and doing a squat like that, going back to that example we were talking about where I kind of cave in the front of my abdomen and I lose my obliques and rib cage position, right? What do I do about that? Or maybe, as I go down in a squat, I lose oblique tension on one side, and I have a hip shift, right? What do I do about that? If I know I can neurologically use my obliques, so I can go through an oblique sit and use the obliques, maybe there is a strength problem. So that's the point where we're going to go through some dedicated oblique strengthening exercises. Our focus is still on using the obliques properly in the ways we've kind of outlined a second ago, but we're focusing on creating more progressive overload as opposed to simply engaging a particular technique, okay? So let's say our lifter who rounds over a little bit more and has that shift, right? So our first point is we're gonna go through good, clean, unloaded movement, and then if they have that shift where we know they're losing expansion in their left oblique and creating a little bit of a left trunk flexion and a shift over to the right, for example, right? Let's go through some split squats. They give us a chance to challenge side-to-side control, which is obliques to some degree. And then they also offer a good chance to train extra quad volume. You get some more glute function out of it as well. So they're a pretty good accessory movement to train. It covers a lot of stuff. And we can put our own spin on it to get more oblique strengthening. So traditionally, a split squat, you're going to have something to the tune of a barbell on your shoulders, or you're going to have dumbbells down by your sides. Those are both useful, but they're not really going to train your obliques much more than a regular barbell squat would because there's no side-to-side imbalance. So you can load these pretty heavy still, but you could do an offset dumbbell lunge, for example, right? So I've got one hand to monitor my oblique, right? I'm training my squat pattern on my left leg, and I'm loading on the one side. So this load here allows me to, or forces me to engage my left oblique a little bit more so that I don't fall over, right? And then I'm training my squat pattern. So I'm making sure my hip, knee, and ankle angles all match pretty closely to my regular squat, right? I've got a relatively upright torso when I squat, so I'm going to think about trying to do my split squat like so, right? I've got my hand on my waist, kind of monitoring for that tension and abdominal pressure for the expansion, and rolling through, right? That lifter who has trouble with keeping that left oblique expansion is probably going to find that as they go down, they're going to want to collapse, use their back, shift over, and they'll have probably a little bit more trouble balancing on that side. So taking your time with it, making sure that you're getting quality over quantity here, then adding weight accordingly is going to be really important, right? Similarly, that lifter who struggles with expansion on the left side, probably going to have a little bit of an easier time on the right side because they don't have any issues here, and they'll be able to roll through their split squats probably without much of an issue. But that's part of the point of unilateral work, is cleaning up imbalances left to right. Some other things we can do in terms of dedicated core training for the obliques, right? So in place of what you might see in a powerlifting program in the shape of an ab wheel or sit-ups or GHR sit-ups, that kind of stuff, is you can get into some loaded carries or some Pallof presses, or some two personal favorites. With these, quite simply, a suitcase carry is a farmer's carry, but you're only using one hand, so challenging the obliques in the same way that we were doing in that split squat, and you'd just be walking around with it with a focus on keeping tension and expansion and abdominal pressure in the trunk, right? Or going through some Pallof presses, right? These are an exercise that get butchered all the time. I see people using weights they probably shouldn't be using, and really just not creating proper brace. So better off to start too light and making sure you're engaging a proper brace than going super heavy and impressing the Pallof press Olympic judges. They don't exist. So here, you can always check yourself, make sure those are engaged, and hold. And press back, right? If you really want to challenge yourself, you can always add a breathing component to any of those core training exercises you're doing. You kind of have to with the suitcase carries already, but Pallof presses are a little bit more challenging with that. So as you hold the extended position in the Pallof press, you're making sure that you're keeping tension while you're breathing. So that gets a little tougher. Here, hold. Couple really basic ideas. Those are mostly frontal plane control stuff, so your side-to-side control. Pallof press does have a little bit of transverse plane, meaning rotational control to it. But if you're really going to go after full function of the obliques, we want frontal plane as well as transverse plane control. So getting into really simple stuff for powerlifting, I don't want to make this too hard. But even going into simple things like a renegade row or a short position renegade row, we're in more of a bear position as opposed to a plank. And you're focusing on lifting the dumbbell up into the row by pushing through the ground. So if I'm rowing with my right arm, I'm actually trying to train my left oblique to do the work. So look something like this. Here, and you can see if you look from the top down, I'm initiating the row by pushing with my right arm until my trunk rotates. And then the dumbbell follows, right? So from here, and that's following that transverse component to the oblique function, right? In English, lets you rotate using your obliques, so you're getting full function out of the obliques. That's all for today. Oblique function, break it down. Make sure you can use them, make sure your brain understands how to use them, and then apply it to the movements you're trying to train and strengthen them so that you default to them. Lastly, we've got a great Facebook group called Starting Powerlifting. I'll leave a link for it down in the description below for YouTube, and you can see it through the link in the bio on Instagram. It's a group of powerlifters, experienced lifters and newer lifters alike. Everybody's in it to help everyone out. You can feel free to post up videos there to get form critique. There's a lot of information that gets posted there too in terms of content like this, which is helping you train yourself better, program design, or any other questions you've really got about powerlifting or strength training in general. feel free to join that group and kind of share the wealth and benefit from it. Thanks. We'll see you next week.